Can you guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Kim? Great. Fantastic. All right, where we are in the Gita at the moment is we are much better. All right. Where we are in the Gita at the moment is that Arjuna found himself on a battlefield, faced off against his friends and family in a fratricidal war for the ages, where the fate of the world hung in the balance. He had to ask himself the greatest moral question of all, like the biggest moral thought experiment you could imagine. Do I sacrifice the whole world or everyone I love? It's not like your daughter for the life of 10 people or even your kid for the life of 100 people. It's everything you love for the rest of the world. It's a big moral dilemma. That was what Arjuna found himself up against. He had just a full nervous breakdown. He had a full existential crisis. He didn't know which end was up. He took shelter of Krishna, and Krishna enlightened him that you're not the body, which really is a game changer. And then the consequence of that, which is that you should do your duty but not be attached. Arjuna couldn't quite wrap his head around that, so Krishna even introduced the idea, okay, fine, be attached but do your duty. If you're doing your duty, you'll be connected to something higher than yourself. You'll have a sense of self that goes beyond your whims, which go up and down, like the sun in the sky. And by attaching yourself to doing your duty, instead of what feels good, instead of avoiding pain and moving towards pleasure and being under the clutches of that roller coaster ride, instead you should do your duty in all circumstances and just not worry about what happens. Because if you worry about what happens as a result of doing your duty, you're not really attached to doing your duty. You're attached to the results. And when the results don't go your way, like I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were telling me, what were they telling me? They were telling me that they've got this incredible career plan. They quit their corporate job. They live in Europe. They quit their corporate job, and they've been working there for 20 years. They had a degree in it. They've been working there for 20 years. In their 40s, they quit their job, and they're becoming a life coach. You know? And they're all about it. And they do retreats already, successfully do retreats all around Europe. And they have a following, and they do kirtan programs, and they're going to become a life coach. They want to finally monetize what they do for fun. And the person was telling me how miserable they are. And I said, why are you miserable? And he goes, well, I'm having to shop for clients, and I'm having to I'm trying to network with people, and I feel like a pounds and shillings man. That gives you a clue as to where they're from. This is weird. Looks like you're giving me the middle finger. I just sort of lost my passion. And I said, no, you didn't. I said, I did these tours to India, and I have to convince people to give me money and to take them with me, but I love doing it, and if I didn't need the money, I'd just take everybody for free. And so I go, the reason why you don't like what you're doing all of a sudden is because you're not successful at it. If you were doing the grind and monetizing your relationships and social networking all the time, and moving from cold to warm leads and closing, and people were buying what you're selling, and you were successful, and you were making a bunch of money doing it, you'd be in ecstasy right now. You've always had to do this. You do retreats all the time. You have to do the exact same kind of closing with people when you're doing retreats, but you're not bothered by that. It's just all part of the whole package. You're changing people's lives. It's in their best interest. You have real faith in what you're doing. I said, so it has nothing whatsoever to do with that your activity has changed. What's changed is that you're not successful. And that's robbed you of your enthusiasm, and therefore you're misappropriately labeling it as a grind and different and not as much fun as it used to be. And it's actually exactly as much fun as it used to be. You're just not successful at it, and therefore you're losing your nerve, and all of a sudden you're changing your take. But it's duplicit. It's not even honest, because what you're doing is the exact same thing you do for all these other things you'd say you do for free. Do you follow? That's the difference between doing your duty and doing your duty for results. You follow? It's a big difference. Anyway, Arjuna is told, do your duty, even for the results, fine. But at least attach yourself to doing your duty for something higher. But that means that you do it no matter what happens. You at least have enough faith that you know this is what I need to do. Even you want the results, you know that's the way to get them. And so you're not going to waver, or you're not going to lose your nerve when the going gets tough a little bit. Does that make sense? So even the act of doing your duty for the results, if you understand it's your duty, it was what you were meant to do, it's why you're put on this earth, it's going to give you some steely resolve, which is going to help you through difficult times of success and failure. Otherwise, you do something, you think it's your duty till you're unsuccessful, then you go do something else, and if you're not successful there for 5 minutes, you jump around. It's interesting, but in the U.S., if you're a Hare Krishna devotee in the U.S., devotees may fall away from their spiritual life. But one thing that almost never happens is they almost never go back to eating meat. It's extremely rare. If you meet a devotee and they've gone back to eating meat, now when you're coming out of eating meat, we're like super nice to you. But once we get you and you no longer eat meat again, if you go back to eating meat, it's like, we look at you the same way a born-again Christian looks at someone who becomes a Hare Krishna. We just see that as like a combination of pity and disgust, depending on where you're at. It's such a core part of our identity that at least we don't eat meat. And so when a devotee falls that far, like, wow, you really gave up your spiritual life. Indian people look at people who get divorced in the same way. Somehow we didn't get that one. At least not all of us got that one. And people get married and divorced in the Hare Krishna movement. And we don't ostracize them. Hey, we're fine. Today, we're fine. Just let her do her thing. Don't worry about it even. We don't ostracize people because they get divorced. But in India, where the divorce rate is 1%, 1/50th of what it is in the U.S., when people get divorced, it's like, it's as bad as it is for us when somebody goes back to eating meat. If you meet Indian devotees, and you're like, oh, I got divorced, they're like, oh, it's like, like, yuck. You're like a leper. Or a COVID-19 person. You're a leper. You're a pariah. Because you've shown you don't have character. You've shown a core lack of integrity. You understand? So, different cultures, different groups, even sometimes within the same group, in different cultures where that same group exists. Indian Hare Krishna devotees versus Western Hare Krishna devotees. You have these different mores, these different taboos, these certain social norms, what is considered normative behavior, what is considered moral behavior. And when you break that, it's a problem. It's a problem. So there may be different standards of what moral behavior consists of, even within the same subsect, even within the same religious or spiritual group. You may have different standards of what is moral and what is immoral behavior. But there is some standard. There is some baseline standard, and all groups have it. If you guys want to know what your basic standard is, what happens to somebody if they go back, what do you think about somebody, one of your brethren, if they go back to eating meat? The three of you, I don't know what your answers are because you haven't been around us long enough. You follow? But with the rest of you who've been around a little longer, I know what your answer is. You would be like, ugh, that's really gross. I can't be that close to you. That's your bottom barrel moral behavior. It's a minimum standard of conduct. Other groups have different value systems, even within our sect. Most of you, if somebody was like smoking a little ganja or something like that, you wouldn't think it's the end of the world. But, you know, if one of my contemporaries started smoking ganja, it wouldn't be as bad if they ate meat, but it would be like, man, you really lost the plot. Like, what happened to you? Like, you have a core lack of integrity. Like, you took vows. What's wrong with you? Prabhupada was one time exasperated at the inability of his Western disciples to follow their vows that they took to him. And he said, even a gentleman keeps his vow. Like, he was like surprised, like, how could you give your word and then you didn't keep it? You know, the samurai culture, they never gave their word. Bushido is the culture of the warrior class. What do you guys smile at each other for? Some kind of inner Jewish joke or something? What's going on?
There was a yoga teacher that called himself that.
Bushido? A yoga teacher calls himself Bushido? He's like got mixed up, right? He thought he had a Sanskrit dictionary, but he actually had a Japanese one. They were just telling me that some yoga teacher used to call himself Bushido. So when I said it, they looked at each other all grimacing. Okay, so yeah. In Japanese samurai culture, nobody made promises. Do you know why nobody made promises? Yeah?
Because if you broke it and your word was basically death.
Yeah, but so what? If you can keep your word, why not make a promise? They didn't make promises because they didn't have to make promises, because if they ever said they were going to do something, that was a commitment to do it. Do you follow? If they said, I'm going to be here at this time, I'm going to do this, That was them taking a blood oath to do that thing upon pain of death.
Part of their duty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna work back to the word duty in a minute, but I'm just trying to get you guys. I'm trying to take you guys on a little journey. So if you want to try and lock it down, you're kind of gonna miss the magic. Don't worry, I know where I'm going. For the samurai, if they gave if they said, I'm going to do this, they didn't have to give their word, and I promise you and I guarantee you, because just saying I'm going to do it was equivalent to giving their word. Such a high standard of morality. In feudal Japanese culture, if you committed murder and you apologized for committing murder, you were oftentimes forgiven by the courts, because to apologize and humble yourself and beg for forgiveness was considered to be so painful that it was like you couldn't do that unless you had rectified yourself. So there's cases of people merely apologizing, and it was so shameful they were forgiven for the crime of murder just because they humbled themselves by apologizing. This is the same culture that gave us seppuku. They gave us hirakari, often mispronounced harikari. Hirakari is the ritual disembowelment if you've humiliated yourself. If your stock went down in samurai culture because you behaved in a cowardly fashion, which was the end for them, then you would disembowel yourself. And by disemboweling yourself, which is incredibly, ridiculously painful, and doing it to yourself, you wiped the slate clean. And you brought honor back to your name. Even being allowed to ritually kill yourself was like a privilege. If you were defeated, you would ask for the privilege of being allowed to kill yourself. And the enemy, like if you fought valiantly and bravely, they would allow you to. After you'd suffered enough, then one of your friends would cut your head off. If he didn't manage to get it done in one clean swipe, he became humiliated. That he became a coward. I mean, there's a really heavy group of people. With sort of a, I mean, you know, the Yakuza has that thing where you cut off a part of your finger if you embarrass yourself as an offering to the mafia lord. I lived in Japan. I saw people with their fingers cut off. I saw Yakuza missing a piece of their finger. It's an actual thing. It's not just in the movies. They actually do it. So you get these cultures, they have their mores, their value system. Sometimes they're quite extreme. And Prabhupada made the point, well, you made a promise, even a gentleman keeps his promise. There were some cultures where you didn't make promises. You simply said something and you became bound. So far removed from our culture where people say anything as a social lubricant. Isn't it? I appreciate these old world cultures. I appreciate people who take vows, make promises, and keep them. Like, that's the tribe I want to belong to. People have that character. I consider that to be honorable. Those are the people I want to follow. Those are the people I want to be counted with. I want to be part of that tribe with honorable people who live exemplary lives, who keep their promises. It takes a little bit of introspection and thoughtfulness. But if you have that, you can walk into a group and you can understand the mores of that group, the value system of that group, the inviolable code of conduct amongst Jews. Like, what's the core of Judaism? Marry a Jew. They don't even care if you believe in God. But if you marry a Jew and keep the bloodline pure, then that's all they ask for. Isn't it? Even your parents may have abandoned that with you guys. But up until your generation, your parents never married outside of the Jewish faith. For ostensibly for thousands of years. You know, because you got your DNA done, it was 100% Jewish. One of our students got their DNA done, and they came out 100% Jewish, and then they called the company and demanded a refund because they didn't tell them anything new and exciting about themselves. I kind of don't want to say it on camera because then it owns me, but I'm part Jewish. I got my DNA done and I'm part Ashkenazi Jew. So I am a Red Sea pedestrian and I can speak about my people in a humorous way if I want to. I've earned that right. And when I heard that, when I heard her tell me this, she told me this, she said, I called the company and demanded a refund. I go, that's the proof you're 100%. My people. Think about like the culture that a group of people would have made it so important that up until 2000, 1990, whatever, when you guys were born, your families meticulously preserved that ethnicity because they were taught by their parents and their parents. Forget whether or not it's a valuable thing, whether or not you should do that, whether or not that should be important for a moment, and just realize how incredible that is, that tens of millions of people decided this is important. For 1,000 years, they did it. You know? It's interesting. I don't know how much you guys know about the transatlantic slave trade, but just because it's been on my mind and I talk to people about it every day, we're going to talk about it for a minute. 12 million slaves were brought from the west coast of Africa to the Americas. Only 500,000 of them came to the U.S. 2 million died en route. That knocks us down to 10 million. The 10 million who actually, and that's a lot of people to lose. 2.5 million died on the journey, on the Middle Passage. Took about 2 months. 20% mortality rate. That's a lot. Once the black African people who had been captured and enslaved arrived, they had a couple places they went to. They went to the U.S. In the U.S., it was legal to dismember a slave as a punishment. In Massachusetts, it's not like in the Deep South. All along the Eastern Seaboard, the U.S., this was the standard. It was chattel slavery. You owned it. It was property. A person was property. As macabre as that sounds. So it was a fate worse than death, practically speaking, to arrive in the U.S. But then they had this whole thing, these what are called seasoning camps that were there in the Caribbean, Jamaica, because most of the slaves didn't come to the U.S., only 500,000 out of 10 million. Most of them went down to Brazil. So there's so many black people in Brazil. It's a huge country. And they grew so much of the world's sugarcane. It became rum, which was traded like money. Just like the Romans traded salt like it was money, rum was like money. And they distilled rum in Boston, and they also did it in London. from sugarcane. Also, I mean, they did it in Jamaica, they did it everywhere eventually, but they would transport this sugarcane up to the U.S. or up to England, or the cotton would go from the U.S. And the cotton is synonymous with the Industrial Revolution, the cotton gin. The Industrial Revolution hinged on the ability to make mill cloth, which eventually became a huge arguing point with the Indians. The Indians, when they were revolting against the British, they revolted by refusing to wear British mill cloth and wearing instead hand-loom cotton called khadi. And Gandhi started this hand-loom cotton movement and these khadi bandars, these places where they sold hand-loom cloth. The cloth I'm wearing is hand-loom cloth. And so it's like a very rough, you can see the broken fibers. It's not like a very long, perfect fibers because it's not made on a machine. It's made by hand. And Prabhupada wore hand-loomed cloth to signify that he was a member of Gandhi's rebellion against the British. He refused to wear their fine milled cloth. And actually the Gandhi Khadi Bandars, they still exist in India, all over India. You can go and find these little overpriced government shops where they keep this hand-loom industry alive. And villagers make these products, and they're sold all over India, and it's a government-sponsored thing. Anyway, cotton, the Industrial Revolution, all on the backs of slaves. So these slaves would get put in these seasoning camps, and the average life expectancy of a slave, having made the transatlantic journey, was 7 years. Because the diseases were horrific. They were all new diseases that black people weren't used to getting, and additionally, African people weren't used to getting, and they also just worked impossibly hard. And so they drove them into the ground. That's why it was natural that, when black people were emancipated, they farmed. The vast majority of farming in the U.S. For the last century was black people. But then when they made the New Deal and they came up with Social Security, which was insurance for old people, they left farmers out. And because most of the farmers in the U.S. were black people, it was essentially a way of cutting black people out of Social Security and the core of the New Deal, which was some kind of insurance policy for when you got old that you'd be able to live. There was just, fundamental racism that was at work. Even in the 30s and 40s in the policies of our nation that helped us come out of the Great Depression. We largely left black people out of that process. And so farm workers were left out. Anyway, most of the slaves, they had to go down. And so what they would do is, because the conditions in South America were so extreme, and slaves just would die of all the diseases you could catch, they would season them, beat them, and work them, and expose them to diseases, and in the Caribbean, in Haiti, in Jamaica. And then once that was done, then they would sell them off. But part of what happened was that black people lost their entire culture. So whereas with Jewish people, they were able to, through the Holocaust, where they lost in a few years, a few years. There were 4 million slaves in the U.S. There were 500,000 we brought into the U.S., 4 million slaves because they had children by the time they were emancipated. 6 million Jews, just boom, gone in a few years. was 35-40% of the Jewish population in the world. Can you imagine those numbers? They killed 35 to 40% of the Jewish population, which had been around for thousands of years, this community. And they wiped them out. I mean, to understand what they did, you'd have to think about, there's 3 billion Christians. Imagine wiping out 1 billion Christians. There's 2 billion Muslims. Imagine wiping out 600-700 million Muslims. The numbers, it's not even possible to conceive of. They were a small enough ethnic group where you could do that, but the numbers are almost they're death-defying, what we consider to be like the most horrible thing in the world, and it happened like that. But somehow you guys were able to keep your culture. Black people in this country largely lost their culture because they were robbed. That's why Malcolm X put an X after his name. That's why many of his followers put an X after their name, because they didn't want to take a name that a slave owner had given them when he emancipated them. Like, here's a gift. Let me give you a name of a dead president. Malcolm X's name was Malcolm Smalls. Right? But he changed it, Malcolm X, because why do I want to take the name of why do I want to accept that as my name? I don't know my name because I was robbed hundreds of years ago. Most black people in this country, unless they do their DNA, and it's a great thing because they can find out where they were from originally, but it was like, tens of millions of people. There's 40 million black people in this country. Tens of millions of people. Don't know where they're from. You look at their facial features and get some kind of sense. But you can't really know before DNA testing. I'm unaware of any other group that was that uprooted to where there was almost no trace left other than the color of their skin, of their heritage. Malcolm X felt so passionately about this when he was with the Nation of Islam. I think he changed his tune a little bit towards the end of his life. But when he was with the Nation of Islam, which is they're a whole really interesting group. I'll save that for another day. But when he was with the Nation of Islam, he was a part of this Back to Africa movement. He said, let's go back to Africa. Let's discover who we are. Let's meet our people. Let's regain our dignity. And then let's come back to this country and demand respect. But for a good decade, when he was preaching the Nation of Islam's gospel, this was his mantra. And I don't know what the last year of his life, he switched tunes, last couple of years of his life. But, and I didn't find that when I looked at his sermons. I'll call them that for lack of a better. When I looked at his lectures in the last year and a half of his life, I didn't see any mention of that. But I did see it. It was a real common theme in his earlier stuff. Go back to Africa. Let's regain our dignity. Let's find out what it means to be a man and have some self-pride. And then let's come back here and demand respect. That idea of demanding respect was with him from beginning to end. He didn't give that one up after he left the Nation of Islam. That one stayed with him till the very end. That, if we can get respect peacefully, that's great. If we can't get respect peacefully, then we got to fight for respect. We got to fight for equal rights. We got to fight for our share. He gave up a lot of things: the inherent evilness of white people, the blue-eyed devil rhetoric that he used to spout, the idea that all white people were inherently evil. He went to Mecca and he met a bunch of white Muslims, and he saw them and he realized, wow, this is really the United Nations over here. And he started rethinking things. He went to Africa, and he also saw North Africa people look a lot different than they look in South Africa, but they were all Muslims. And so he broadened his horizons a little bit. But this idea of the bullet or the ballot, that never left him. That we're either going to get it by the ballot or we're going to get it by the bullet, but somehow or other we're going to get our equal rights, and we have to demand them. And if they're not given to us, we have to take them. It's an unusual phenomenon, the way that the entire history of a culture was stripped from them. Even they gave up their religion. They all became Christians. Even you look at the blackest of black things, like gospel music. right? Like stuff that is just unapologetically and beautifully black, that goes back as far as anybody can remember, like gospel music. That's the white man's religion. But there was something I wanted to mention. When you look at Southern Christianity in its Southern iteration, you find that preachers, Baptist preachers, Pentecostal preachers, Holy Rollers, those like really heavily evangelical churches in their Southern flavor, in that Southern iteration, you find that they have a bunch of shamanic stuff from Africa with them. You lay hands on people and they faint. They speak in tongues. You get slain in the spirit. All this stuff, that is straight from African shamanism. And you can know, oh, how about voodoo from Haiti? Yeah, that's also from African shamanism. Well, how about the, what do they call it? Santeria. Santeria. Sangria is a drink. Santeria. So, yeah, Santeria. That's also African shamanism. And so you find in the southern flavor of Christianity, you find that some of their spirituality survived and became syncretistically merged with Christianity in a way that survives till today. And when you find all those white people in the Pentecostal church, like falling on the ground and speaking in tongues and showing you a little statement from the Bible and trying to justify what they're doing, that's straight African shamanism, which made its way to the New Shore and became powerful enough, it became a part of their Christianity. We find these groups of people, no matter what happens, certain things get held on to. Something has to get held on to. You have to preserve something and pass it on to the next generation, which means you have to live a life which is about something more than yourself, so that you can pass something down to your children, so that your whole life isn't just a life of whimsy and all you give to your children is sensuality and your own weakness and cowardice. So what is Bushido? Whether it's Jewish ethnicity, whether it's the shamanic practices that came over, whether it's our idea that you don't eat meat, whether it's the idea that you also keep all your vows, including your marriage vows. We're trying to pass on a legacy to the next generation, and we have to embody that and live it in order for it to be vital enough for us to transplant it to new soil, namely our children, the next generation down. Did you follow that? We're trying to preserve something we feel is special, and we want to give a gift to the next generation. So we have to preserve that gift and live that gift in our own life to make it ours so it's vital and it's healthy, and we can transplant it into virgin soil in the form of our children, who then can grow it in their own lives and keep it healthy and strong. If the plant is weak and if we haven't embodied it, they won't be able to grow it because they won't know what to look for. There's nothing left. Whenever you talk about doing your duty but not being attached to the results, what inevitably people talk about is, well, how do I know what my duty is? And then you get into your Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra conversation. Or you get into your three estates of medieval Europe, or you get into, doing vocational aptitude tests, or looking for your God-given talents, and doing a Venn diagram and figuring out a way to find out what you love doing and what you're good at and what's good for the world and what you can make money doing. You find that sweet spot in between all of that, and that's your purpose. There's a million different ways of figuring out what your purpose is. From the old Vedic tradition of 4 social orders, or the more recent jati, which is hundreds of social orders, to the 3 classes of men in Plato's Republic, to the 3 estates of medieval Europe, to the Venn diagrams and vocational aptitude testing that I went through in high school, to all the headway that positive psychology has made in helping people to take these type of aptitude tests to figure out what they're good at. People always want to know, well, what should I do? I don't think that's so important. I think we should get straight with our moral compass and who we should be in terms of our fundamental value system. And I think that operates independently to some extent of what you do for money. Now, obviously certain things you do for money, like being a drug dealer or a butcher or a prostitute, you gotta let go by the wayside because they contradict our basic moral commitments. But I think it kind of doesn't matter what you do for money, provided it's not innately sinful. It matters how you live your life. Do you get married? Do you have a bunch of girlfriends and boyfriends? Do you use drugs? Do you eat meat? Do you chant? Do you serve at the temple? We should make this what it means to do our duty. This is our Sanatan Dharma. Sana means old. Sanatan Dharma, the eternal Dharma. We should focus on that, the Nitya Dharma, the eternal Dharma. What we do in this world may change over time, and to some extent it may not be so important. I don't judge somebody by whether they're a garbage man or a doctor. I judge somebody by their character. As devotees, we should develop character. We should live a life of integrity. And then whatever we do to pay our bills isn't such a big deal. So when Arjuna is told to do your duty, his duty was real clear. He was a warrior. It might not be so clear for us what we're supposed to do out of college, or do we do what we got our degree, and what do we do because we need money, and we got laid off, and we got to take a job that isn't what we like doing, or this or that. We want to really focus on that. I have another idea. I think we need to focus on basic human culture, basic integrity as devotees. We should judge people by whether they keep their vows, not by how much money they have. We should create a revolution in culture where the merit of a man, the merit of a woman, is by the life they live, by their moral compass, their integrity, their honesty, their loyalty, their character, their purity, their selflessness, as manifested in their day-to-day life, who they are. So when Krishna talks about doing his duty to Arjuna, it's natural for you to think about, well, what's my duty? What should I be doing for money? Do you guys ever think like that? You've had those thoughts? We got to do something more basic than that. We have to focus on our basic moral compass and our value system. And we have to sharply relegate what you do for money to a lower position because it's actually not that important. Low-class people judge you by what you have. High-class people judge you by who you are. My heroes are people with impeccable morality and integrity, with absolute sincerity, who are deeply devoted and show it, not with their mouth, but with their life. So when Krishna says, even if you're attached, do your duty, the way that translates in 2020 to this assembly is, even if you want to enjoy this world, don't sell your soul to do it. Don't compromise your values. You follow? For Krishna Arjuna, he said, you're not the body, so do your duty and don't be so attached. And most people, even they do their duty, they only do their duty if they're successful doing it. As soon as they're not successful doing it, they throw it away. They don't have that, like, staying power. They're cheap, they're shallow. One of my elders, not like my exact elder, but somebody part of the generation before me, he used to call shallow people Dixies. Like a Dixie cup, like a little cup, can't hold much water. Oh, they're just a Dixie. They're a little person, a little character. We should try to dig deep so we can hold a lot of water. So when Krishna says, do your duty, don't be attached to the results, okay, fine. If you can't do that, then be attached to the results, but don't give up your duty. At least that'll connect you to something higher. I'm saying, hey, you want to enjoy this world? Fine. Don't sell your soul. What does that mean? Don't break your vows. Well, I want to have sex. Like what I'm saying, and get married. I want to use drugs. Yeah, tough luck. Go work out. Get a nice endorphin hit from that. You follow? Go eat a Beyond Burger. Work out. Get married. Enjoy the world however you want to. But don't be a coward. Don't be a shallow. Don't be a Dixie cup. Be somebody incredible. Be somebody your kids can look up to. Be somebody that has something of value to give to your children. This is the core of what it means to belong to a group. You decide with that group what's really important, and that's what binds you together. You've all come to the same conclusion. For the Jews, it was their ethnicity. For us, we've got something. It's like you're vegetarian, but it should really be more than that. You follow? We should have a deeper cup than that. It's a pretty low level common denominator. Right? And so when Krishna says, do your duty, what that means to us is keep your vows. Chant your rounds. Serve your elders. Be a part of something bigger than yourself in a real way. Have that be who you are, and then do whatever you do for money. You understand how I'm interpreting this section for today's class? So then Krishna says this, it's far better, this is text 35 of the chapter that we're currently studying. It's far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. You should do your own duty, even though faultily, than do another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing your own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. It's better to do your swadharma, your own duty, Then paradharma, another's duties. In the commentary to the Gita of Sridhar Swami, a very famous 13th, 14th century pundit, his introduction is that he says Arjuna became confused about his own duty and tried to do another's duty, and Krishna corrected him. In how I'm exegetically interpreting this verse to put old wine into a new bottle, what this boils down to for us is that we should not give up our spiritual duties. You follow? If you were to interpret it in the other way, if you start thinking, if I change my job, I'm going to change my life, you've misunderstood that there is no material solution for what's ultimately a spiritual problem. If you think that if I change my job, I'm going to change my life, you just became a functional atheist because you're thinking that what you do for money is going to change who you are. It's not. And then you start jumping around from woman to woman, from job to job, from degree to degree, from place to place, thinking if I just get it right, I'm going to be happy. And you can't figure out why happiness evades you, because you don't find happiness by moving around. You find happiness by moving inward. And so Krishna is saying to Arjuna, hey, don't think you're going to build a better mousetrap, or the grass is greener on the other side of the street, or you're going to get it all figured out and you're going to become happy materially. That's not on offer. There is no material solution to what's fundamentally a spiritual problem. Therefore, stop looking outside yourself externally to find your happiness. Start finding happiness today within yourself. Stick to your duty. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. That person you married, stay with them. That temple you're a part of, stay there. That job you have, maybe you just keep doing it. Stop trying to think you're going to make a material solution that's going to make you spiritually happy. It's like trying to put gas in your car and become satisfied in your stomach. It's two different things. So one way to interpret this verse, which I think has a lot of merit, is very important for the voice. Hey man, if it's got to be like 10 minutes texting, just boogie. Just, I'm sorry. Nah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like you're doing this. I'm trying to look at you. We're face to face. So just, you got the recording. You can go back and look at it. But at least I thought, like, I waited for like 10, 15 minutes. I was like, we're cool. All right. Apologize. I tried to wait. I was like, all right, he must have something important. Must be doing some day trading or something like that. I'll let him go. At a certain point, I was like, hey, man, come on. We got a small crew. Come on. You're killing me over there. You got front row and you're texting on me. Don't scribe me. Just watch, all right? We'll get more done like that. The primary way I think we should look at this verse is do not give up our culture of being a devotee. Whatever you do for work doesn't matter. The secondary way to understand that is don't think that by changing your job you're going to become happy. A lot of times you don't have to change your job. If you're chanting your rounds, if you're keeping body and soul together, if you're putting food on the table, you probably don't have to change your job. Find a job that's favorable for your spiritual life. Don't try to become too happy materially. Don't buy into that illusion. You'll never be happy. Commit yourself to finding happiness within, and then just do whatever job you're good at that puts food on the table and allows you to practice your spiritual life. And when a job starts to consume you and kill you, it's like, it's not for me. A friend of mine was going to join the Coast Guard at one point. It's like, I'll have to move somewhere else. Okay, that's not going to work. That's not going to be good for you. A childhood dream of joining the Coast Guard, we're not going to do that anymore because it's incompatible with your spiritual life. because you got to go away on long tours of duty, move away from a temple, and have no connection. It's going to kill you. It's not worth it. That's another way to read the verse. If you're always jumping around to the next new thing, then that means you think that's what's going to make you happy. And you're not focusing on what's actually going to make you happy. And you've made a categorical error in your thought process. Those are the two ways I'm reading the verse. Arjuna then said, how much time I got? Well, I think we're good there. I got 4 minutes left. I'll get off my soapbox for a second. Give me some feedback, please. Yeah, loud.
I really appreciated the separation of spiritual duty and material occupation.
Darshan, give me a thumbs up if you heard today. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, it's certainly is a question that comes up a lot. What is my duty when we are talking to others? And to press this point you made today, which I believe is the first time I heard, it's very valuable. That is our duty. And everything else that we do materially for our occupation should be secondary. So I really appreciate you elaborating on this point so clearly. It's very valuable.
Malcolm X had the same idea about people working on their integrity. He was really big on the people he ministered to having impeccable character. It led to his breakup with Elijah Muhammad, who was found to be lacking in his personal character. And so he really wanted to focus on people having good character. It's not popular. Focusing on character development. If you want to be like really unpopular and not become hugely popular, make your movement about just personal character development. Because you're going against like the trend. You're going against like everybody's like, it's about making money and becoming successful and becoming popular. But the very nature of developing integrity and character development is you don't care about those things. It's the opposite of this, populism and vox populi and just trying to get the votes and get people to sign on with you. It's the opposite. Prabhupada used to describe it as boiling the milk. At one point in 1975, Prabhupada said, we have enough devotees now. We don't have to go out and preach anymore. Now let's boil the milk. When you boil milk in India, you take milk and you boil it and the milk goes down. And it becomes this thing called koa, which used to make milk sweets. You boil the milk down and it becomes thickened and you evaporate all the water off it. It becomes very thick. And so you boil the milk. You follow? And you thicken it. And it becomes like deeper and more powerful and more concentrated. Probably say, I didn't make these books for you to distribute. I made them for you to read. What good is distributing if you're not reading them yourself? And so this idea is what keeps the tradition vital. It's what keeps people pure. When people walk in the door and they find out, oh, to be one of you, I have to have character. I have to have integrity. Most people go out the door, but the people who stay, they know what they signed up for. And you get real people who are shopping for diamonds. You sell diamonds, you're not going to have a million customers. But the ones who buy your product are going to be really serious about it and they're going to pay for it. It's how you keep a religion from degrading. It's how we keep ourselves from degrading. It's how we form something we can give to somebody else. It's how we keep that tradition alive. What our predecessors did for thousands of years, the beautiful tradition they kept alive, that they passed down even to us today, we can keep alive. All right, we did? Thank you. You guys can stay on.